And welcome to the Ramen Chokehold podcast. I'm your host, Wombat Jones here. Very special guest in the house to talk about DFC 7 that just went down over the weekend down there in Radelaide. I'm here with the DFC commentator sent from the gods. I'm here with Andy Carpenter. How you going, mate?
I'm good, Wombat. Thank you very much for having me.
Mate, it's absolutely my pleasure, and we ran into each other. We had a little dance as well. We had a little dance on the microphones. We got a couple of fights to call while I was down there.
I had two very entertaining fights, and Wombat got a bit excited with some quite amazing action, some decent shots that I think got you off your chair and got you very excited, which was good to see.
Well, you know what? And there wasn't a finish in that. So if you think that's exciting, you wait till you see when there's a finish, mate.
Oh, mate, I guess of the action that we had on that card, I think I heard you from the commentary booth and down the crowd with the absolutely packed action that we had during the rest of the night.
Oh mate, it was another fantastic night put on down there from Craig and Greg and the boys. I mean, once again, my second time there, and I said after the first time, like I don't want to get too excited. I'm not really going to go out there publicly and talk about what I thought about it. But after the second time, I can take the gloves off and openly admit that it's by far the best venue in the country. Like it's not even actually close, is it? I mean, when you walk into this place, not only at the Adelaide Oval, which I'm sure you'll go on a rant about, all the good things that happen down there at the Adelaide Oval, but it's not only that; it's the room itself and the the audio and the visual. I mean, there's massive screens up everywhere, isn't there?
I mean, the one thing they do is the two things that DFC does the best is they promote fighters, no matter if you're amateur or pro, and they spend bulk coin on production. And the payoff is for both, like I said, the amateurs and professional fighters because they're on an even playing field with regards to promotion and actually getting some exposure. I guess the one thing you want as an amateur is you're really trying to get yourself across there as an athlete. And when you have footage done by a professional production team from an amazing stadium like Adelaide Oval, it really puts you out there and helps you build up a portfolio. And it's I think the most exciting thing about being part of DFC is being able to showcase this from like the mecca of South Australian sport. So the Adelaide Oval, it holds international cricket, rugby, soccer. Ed Sheeran and Adele just recently sold out there. Foo Fighters, Pearl Jam, Neil Diamond, you name it, have all been at Adelaide Oval. But it's weird. You look at the Eastern States, it'll be like fighting promotions in Melbourne having an event at the MCG, Sydney having the SCG, Brisbane having the Gabba. It's such a high class venue, and it's just a really good way to showcase fighters. And with Adelaide Oval, once the sun goes down, the blinds come up and you have this picturesque view of the River Torrens and the Adelaide CBD, and the show just looks like $1,000,000.
Oh, it's crazy. And also you get a little on the side as well. You got the tennis courts where you have that's where the big tennis event in January is held, isn't it?
Yeah, every year at Memorial Drive there,
Memorial Drive, that's it. Yeah.
yeah,
So
they
and
have
and, and like you said, you get one day internationals, mate. There was a one day international the day before DFC.
yeah, there was
South Africa
about
played
50.
Australia.
Yeah, there was about, I think, Adelaide Oval holds about capacity about 50,000 people, and they sell a fair bit of it. And just for, I guess, just for comparison, when the Big Bash games play at Adelaide Oval, they sell out 50,000 every time without fail. And the other states get about 15 to 20,000. So Adelaide Oval is the kind of place where the cricket tragics that travel all over the world, they look forward to the Adelaide Oval games. I mean, I worked at Adelaide Oval all through uni and high school, and when I was there, whenever the Ashes were on, the English fans, the South African fans, New Zealand fans, the Pakistani and the Indian fans, they actually looked forward to the Adelaide Test the most, just because it's such a world-class stadium, and it's one of these stadiums. It's not just a concrete jungle. They've got a lot of greenery. They've got a heritage listed scoreboard. They've got a big hill where people just rock up with their blankets and blow up pools and eskies and just basically tailgate on the grass. So it's got a bit of everything. But the fact that DFC have secured Adelaide Oval for a venue just shows that they're putting as much as they can into this promotion because they want to showcase Australia's best fighters at Australia's best venue. And so, what other place would you want to fight on? The fact that all these fighters, the day after the event, even the night after the event, they all come out, and the one thing they have in common is, oh my God, I've never, one, been treated as a professional like this. Two, my exposure is through the roof. And three, when's the next show? When can I come back on?
Oh, 100%, mate. And they're sort of leading the way in the way that they're sort of handling the fighters and that with all the facilities and the hotels. I think it's a 4-star hotel that they get put up in. And look, it's very impressive. The card itself, before going to the event and looking down the card and you had a look at it, you were kind of excited. You know what I mean? There was some fights in there. Maybe you weren't sure how that were going to play out. And there were some fights in there where you were really like, oh shit, that's really going to be a barn burner. And it kind of played out that way, you know what I mean? So we might as well get stuck into it, mate. And you obviously you were on the call from Ball One down there with Mike Turner and
the Mike the Tornado Turner, the inaugural DFC heavyweight champion,
the champ,
the former brace light heavyweight champion. He's fought all over the country, all over the world. He had a tryout for the Ultimate Fighter a few years ago, and he's just one of these people. Like if there was a Mount Rushmore of Australian MMA, there'd be, it'd be hard pressed for him not to be on there. He's just one of the pioneers in the sport. He's fought all around the country in multiple weight divisions, and it is someone that sharing the booth with him is amazing because he's someone that's knowledgeable and, more importantly, has been there. But we definitely start off with a bang that night. Sam Warren and Thomas Tett, one of the amateur bouts. Sam Warren is his teammate, Mr. Brown, fought on the card as well, who's an Olympian. And just these two coming out. Thing is, it was Sam's amateur debut, and Thomas Tett, it's 1-0 as an amateur. And the best thing about these amateur fights is that they've got nothing to lose. The record means nothing as an amateur, so they're going, you know what? We're going to come out here and put on a show and really just go for broke.
Yeah, and they kind of did, and that's kind of usually how most of the the inexperienced amateur fights happen. But Sam really did look slick once it sort of did hit the mat, and it was pretty impressive, for a debutant. And can you imagine for them? They're walking out first fight of the night. What was there on the weekend? It wasn't full capacity, but it was still
about 1,300.
I was going to say there still would have been a good 1,200-1,300 there.
Yeah.
And you're walking out, and like I said, you've got the big screens everywhere. I think the blinds were still down at that stage, but just people everywhere, and they actually changed the entrances this time, didn't they? They had them coming out of the side again, so they actually had to walk through the crowd, which is kind of amazing. And for them it must have just been an absolute thrill. I did ask another couple of fighters during the night, what's it like up in that cage, you know what I mean, after your fight's finished and that, when you have a look and you're soaking it in, and they were just blown away. So pretty impressive from Sam.
Locking in a guillotine the first round against an explosive power wrestler like Thomas Tett. I had the pleasure to ring announce Thomas's first ever amateur fight at the MMARS, which is also an event put on by DFC, which is mainly for amateurs. It's in a smaller venue, one that you would expect from other promotions, but it was a smaller venue in suburban Adelaide, and they sold out 600 people, and it was just a show for amateurs. And when you're selling out shows of amateurs with that, it really speaks volume what the DFC guys are pumping into this. And Thomas Teddy got his blue belt the night. It was just an amazing victory there. And he is a very tough dude, and it was stylistically a very difficult match for Sam Warren. But the best thing about Sam Warren is that you've got an Olympian training partner that's a different kettle of fish, which we'll talk about later on. But you can't get much higher than training with Olympian day in, day out.
Yeah, 100%. But moving on, One of the most impressive performances, maybe of the entire night, which I was pre-warned about, and I sort of had my eye on him earlier anyway. In Anthony Puglisi, and hopefully I'm saying his last name right because I don't want that guy mounting me. And he
Anthony
had
Pugliese.
yeah, well, like a mama used to make. But and he took on Hayder Kadir, and he's up from ATT, and actually was in the back with Hayder, and he was pumped, ready to go for this one, and man, he come out, and I mean, basically, I mean, he tried to stay on his feet and trade, and he was actually sort of, when he was on his feet, he was actually sort of winning those stand-up battles, and Anthony had the presence of mind to go, I'm not going to be doing that and basically controlled the whole fight on the mat, and there was only one stage, there was a no shit moment where Hayter threw up a go-go plata and actually kind of had it in.
I know it's quite rare to see a go-go plata. I think that was at the end of the second from memory.
Second round, yeah.
But I mean, the thing with Anthony Pugliese, well, the two scariest things about him is one, he's 22 years old and he's just been tearing through the amateurs. And the second scariest thing is that he comes from Rikers, which is South Australia's best Muay Thai gyms, but all of his fights, bar one, have finished by a submission. So, and they've all finished first round. So all but two have finished first round. And we've barely seen him use his striking because he's that dominant with his ground game at the moment. And the scary thing is that his best aspect of his fighting is his stand-up.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I mean, not only that, but before the fights, he was actually on the South Australian TV sports show or whatever it's called, with Craig and the boys down there.
Yeah,
And
Greg Anderson is a former Adelaide Crows player, and Phil Smythe was the former
basketballer,
36ers, and I think he was an Olympian at one stage as well.
Yeah, he definitely was an Olympian. I remember watching him play for the Boomers. He was actually one of my favorite back in the days, like in the early 90s, basketball was actually cool to watch. I remember watching that shit a little bit.
It was Steve Carfino I remember it was NBA Live or NBA Action every Saturday morning, and then I still remember the day where when Shane Hill went toe to toe with Charles Barkley, and you're like, Shane, mate,
yeah, calm down,
bad idea.
But yeah, so he was on that show, and very well spoken kid. Had a lot of people in the crowd, like a lot of support. Also a few sponsors and all that sort of stuff that he's got. So this kid really, like, you know what, I wouldn't mind seeing him, apart from fighting on DFC, which obviously Craig would love to have him on that card every single time. But what I like to see, like these young kids and the amateurs that are showing such promise, I like to see them travel interstate and see how they do. Because it's another kettle of fish. Because when you're traveling interstate, usually speaking, you're getting flown in on weigh-in day, and then you've got to make weight, and then you've got to have your fight the next day with hardly any people that know you in the crowd. And I think it's sort of like a really good test. And I really sort of implore the amateurs that are starting to sort of separate themselves from the pack.
Yeah,
I really implore them to go and grab that experience, win, lose, or draw, and that's what your amateur record's there for. You know what I mean?
It's definitely there just to try and test the water. And the thing with Anthony is, when I spoke to him before the fight, he said that he loves the amateur fights because he learns more and more every time. And this fight, he was on weight with about 3 days to go. He was comfortable. And I mean, we spoke about this in the DFC does a hype show as well called Fight Hype with the Boss with myself, Mike Turner, and promoted Craig Ike.
Yeah, that was awesome, by the way.
Oh, thank you. We
do it again.
We spoke about Anthony about that and about Hayder, who's an absolute beast of a bantamweight, and we said Anthony has this massive hype train behind him, and Hayder is part of ATT. Those guys love to knock out hype, but Hayder definitely put on an absolute show. Anthony's a tough dude, but I'd really like to see Hayder again because I wanted to see him impose his will there. But Hayder is still a very young dude, and it's not the last we've seen of him. It'll be a pleasure to have him back on DFC again because that kid's got a lot to offer. And a lot of the time, like the ATT boys love coming to Adelaide, love fighting on DFC, and the Cardio Flex boys in South Australia and the ATT guys have have a scorecard in their gyms. You know, they like to have the victories against one another. So it'd be interesting to see what happens if he comes back. But again, Anthony Pugliese is probably one of the best amateurs in the state, if not country, pound for pound. And he's going to be someone that I think we're going to be talking about him in a couple of years, you know, going through the UFC ranks and around the world. But I mean, we started off strong, but then we got to the heavyweights, and God, the crowd went nuts for them.
Oh man, and I can tell you why, especially like for everyone that was at the weigh-ins, and there was a small crowd for the weigh-ins. There was actually a little bit of argy-bargy in the weigh-ins. They were pushing each other a little bit and had to be separated. So I knew this fight was going to be a cracker, and not only that, but I mean, if you know Brando, he's never ever 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 going to be in a boring fight, like ever.
No, well, Taylor Piau's last fight went 10 seconds, and Brando's went 15 seconds.
15, yeah, combined 25 seconds, yeah.
And the scary thing about this before with Brando is I've trained at Trinity MMA with Brando, with Mike Turner, also DFC alum Anthony Bino, a few other guys, Tim Rogers, for instance. That whenever Nick Hughes, the coach, goes, "Oh, all right, Andy, go do a round with Turner, go do a round with Bino, go do a round with Tim Rogers." I'm like, "Yep." If he says go do a round with Brando, nope. He is a scary dude. So 3 weeks before DFC, he got offered a fight in New Zealand. He also trains at a Red Star, which is another great kickboxing gym in South Australia. Brando is not a small man. He's 6'5", normally about
He's a
130 kilos.
monster.
The guy that he fought in New Zealand was 7 foot tall, 160 kilos. And when Brando got off the fight, it's like, "Oh, you're fighting a guy that's 6 inches taller than you." Yep. Who's 40 kilos heavier than you? Yep. Don't care.
The other guy dwarfed Brando. I mean,
Oh,
like standing next to Brando, and I mean, I'm no large human, but I still know what big is. Brando's a big dude.
yeah, and
Like,
he's deceptively athletic as well.
but he was literally dwarfed by that other guy.
And
Like,
Taylor Piau he's a big dude as well. He's 22. He doesn't have the height of Brando, but he's just a solid rock. And when this came out, they touched gloves. Brando just threw this massive head kick, and then Taylor managed to get some grappling, and Brando got up. He had great chain wrestling. He was able to get up, and I think the thing with Brando is that this is his second fight. He is a white belt, pure white belt, and he spars with Mike Turner, who is a black belt, and Turner just says how explosive and how tough he is. But the fighter IQ that Brando showed with this, where he had both hooks in on Piau, was going for the rear naked, and managed to go, "Yep, I don't have it," posh it up and start landing heavy bombs. And you think, well, if someone's only had, or it's a second fight, managed to be like, "You know what, that's not working, I'm going to adjust," and then get up there and finish. I mean, Brando, again, another first round stoppage. I mean, this guy is scary. The heavyweight division in Australia, it's not very stacked. And I mean, imagine one day with Brando, get another fight or two under his belt if he's going pro. Such a quick, athletic guy who's just an absolute sponge for the sport that's just absorbing it in. He's going to be scary good one day. And the best thing, or the narrative about Brando is I sat next to the crowd with him in DFC4, and it's public knowledge now because he was in the Adelaide newspaper about last week, but Brando's been in remission for cancer for 18 months. He almost lost his arm for cancer, and his right hand in particular. And he sat next to me in the crowd at DFC4, and he's like, "One day I'm going to be in that cage. I'm going to beat cancer, and I'm going to go in there and live my dream." And in the past 6 months, he's had 2 amateur MMA bouts and 1 professional Muay Thai bout, so kickboxing bout, and he's using that hand that he almost got amputated to knock people out and knock them out in devastating fashion.
yeah, and not only that, he's a cracking bloke. So, big things from Brando, and like you said, I wouldn't mind seeing him on another DFC
Oh,
pretty quickly, and then maybe, like I said, maybe an interstate one.
I mean, you and I were talking before the night started, and Brando came in at 5 p.m. His fight was 7:30. Already had his fist wrap, walking around in thongs, calm as anything, just ready to go.
Yeah, he is something else. He's definitely he's up for a fight. That's for damn sure. So
He
that's
is.
definitely another name to look out for. And then actually in the next fight, um, I was out the back in the dressing rooms actually talking to quite a few of the fighters that were coming up. So I missed some of the action. I was watching it in the screens because even in the change rooms, man, they've got like massive TV screens with the feed going into them. So you don't miss the action. Like there's a good sort of like four, five, six like screens just in
And the
in
change
everyone's
rooms
change room.
actually, the change rooms look onto Adelaide Oval. So they're in the change rooms, and you turn around out the window, and there's a 50,000 seat stadium behind you.
Oh, it's crazy. It's craziness. Like, and I was doing like pre-fight interviews, and I got it so like the clock, the clock was in the background and that.
Oh,
Uh,
it's
it's just a beautiful
well,
ground
I
too.
mean, the next fight was this was something on paper that I was very excited to see. Just a typical striker and grappler, but the thing with this was an amateur fight with an Olympian, and so there's not too many times an Olympian comes across in MMA, but when they do, they turn heads. And Steve Brown, he's a judo black belt, represent Australia in the Olympics and Commonwealth Games. Like it's not too often where you actually see a treat like that, but again, Will Kolarov, who trains with Anthony Pugliese at Rikers, who again is predominantly a striking gym, managed to go toe to toe with Steve Brown. Like Steve, he kept on once he got Will in the clinch. He was always looking for that hip toss. You can see his hips switch, and Will was able to defend it really, really well, and really came off with a very tough decision against Steve Brown. Which I mean, it's only his third fight as an amateur. Obviously, there's a bit of teething issues coming from when you're predominantly used to um, being in judo. But I mean, once Steve's striking gets there, there's a certain kind of work ethic that you have as an Olympian. Once he puts all those pieces together, he's going to be a very dangerous human being.
Oh, 100%, and you see it, with Dan Kelly, who was actually at the fights, cornering a couple of his guys. Um, that the skills definitely and the work ethic and all that sort of thing, they transfer over, and to have, that caliber of athlete coming into MMA is really, really exciting because I think it was as of today, it's been announced that Channel 10 has actually signed with the UFC to do free to air coverage for the next 3 years. So, which is a pretty big deal. And I don't think it's really out there yet. But let me tell you, that is a massive, massive deal. I'm not quite sure how much Channel 10 is going to show and all that sort of thing. But once that starts happening, we're already getting Olympians from judo and other, martial arts, Olympic and Commonwealth Games sort of martial artists coming into MMA
Yeah,
because it gives them an outlet. You know what I mean? Like once their amateur sort of Olympic run's done, I mean they may be sort of 28, 30-ish or something like that, and their competitive juices don't go away, and
no.
they're also still in good enough shape to sort of compete with the best athletes in the world. So,
I mean, you really hit the
um,
nail on the head of where the sport's actually going. I remember, I mean, it's obviously there's always hard comparisons between sport, but I remember I think it was about 1997 or 1998 where Channel 10 started showing the WWF in prime time just on Saturday nights, and they'd only show snippets of certain events, but all of a sudden there was an absolute explosion in Australia where WWE went through the roof. And if you look at that, where the UFC in Australia has predominantly been on 11:30s at night for the Ultimate Fighter, or you'll see the occasional Bellator at 1:30 a.m. But if Channel 10 is spending bulk money on trying to get that sport here, you think with that boom, all of a sudden there's going to be a flow-on effect of, I know, let's go and watch a local MMA show, or let's go and support UFC when it comes here. And all of a sudden you've got people that are going to be going to these gyms wanting to learn the sport. The gyms get bigger, the sport gets bigger, and all of a sudden spots on cards like DFC are going to be hard to get on because everyone wants to be a part of it. And there's only a certain amount of shows you can put on a year without oversaturating the market. But if DFC keeps growing and the sport keeps growing, I mean, you never know what's going to happen. If DFC is putting on one of the best production products in the country, then you've got to think, right, well, something's going to give. There's going to be some form of free to wear, or if not, some cable deal where DFC is going to be showcased on, which is going to turn a lot of heads. If the sport is growing as quickly as it is, and if it's getting exposure now, then the sky's the limit for this sport in Australia. It's relatively new compared to the States, where, I mean, we've only just recently had our first Australian champion being Robert Whittaker, but Australians are competing against, you know, Americans and Russians and Brazilians, where their sport of choice is, you know, wrestling, sambo, BJJ, where people start from 5 years old. We're in Australia. It's like, oh, karate's cute, taekwondo's cute. Let's just let our kids do that for a few months and move on to other sports. All of a sudden, you're going to get all these Australians coming across going, wow, I love MMA. I'm going to start doing that and have the same form of skill set that other people in other countries have.
Well, I sort of compare it, like instead of comparing it to America, I prefer to sort of use like England as the yardstick, and
Yeah,
that way it's sort of like easier as a from a timeline point of view, because England, had their first event way before Australia had theirs, so it sort of gives us like a like I said, like a yardstick to sort of gauge from. And if you look at, like, for argument's sake, Cage Warriors, like everyone knows Cage Warriors champions. Basically, if you're in and around the MMA circles, most people would have heard of the names of the Cage Warriors champions. So there will eventually be an Australian promotion like that. And
yeah.
there's not at the moment. Do you know what I
There's
mean? Like,
there's no
and
real
there's a lot of fans that just watch UFC.
yeah, there's no real like standout Australian promotion at the moment. I mean, they're all competing with each other, but there's no real go-to one that you go, yep, that's number one, that's number two. Where, I mean, you look at the production that DFC is putting on, you think, wow, if they're spending that much money on production and that much time and effort promoting the fighters, you think there's going to be time soon where DFC is going to be potentially the number one promotion in Australia.
Well, I've obviously got to watch my P's and Q's here, but I'll throw my 2 cents into it. The way that I see it is that in Australia at the moment, and I go to all of them, um, they all have their different thing about them. They all have their place. Do you know what I mean? I
Yeah,
think there's so much infighting at the moment between, a couple of the promotions, but generally speaking, most of them get along, which is good to see, and I think it's actually getting better and better and better.
yeah.
Um, for argument's sake, at the last DFC, the XFC owner was down there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot more of that going on, which is
There's a lot
really
more to
good to
gain with
see.
cross promotion. I mean, you think if there's some cross promotion, give it time, there's going to be potentially you have some super fights where, you know, the XFC champion will fight the DFC champion and the Hex champion might get involved. There's all kinds of thing where I mean, the cross promotion is idyllic for everyone, where it's everyone gets to showcase their fighters. And I mean, it's probably not the stage where the fact that MMA in Australia is relatively new. It's still in its infancy, where I think Western Australia only legalized cage fighting about 2 years ago. So if you think compared to, you know, America in the early 2000s, that's where Australia is for MMA at the moment, where the longer it goes on and the more cohabitation you see with all the brands out there, you just watch the surge. And all of a sudden, if Channel 10 signed the UFC, the wave effect or the ripple effect is going to benefit all these smaller promotions and all these gyms and all these up and coming people, because there's going to be more people in gyms, more people to learn off. And at the end of the day, iron sharpens iron. You're only as good as your training partners.
Well, speaking of iron sharpens iron, the next fight on the DFC card was, for me, like before the fight night even started. I sort of circled this fight and I went, whoever wins this fight is more than likely going to turn pro and is definitely going to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, both guys have a massive future, but you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, right? Whichever sort of guy is the one putting his hand up and going to stick out.
It was definitely the one fight where you're like, someone is going to massively step up and really try to take it to the next level. I mean, Shantu Sins, it was the number one ranked amateur flyweight in Australia, but
And
he's
5 and
32.
0. And
Yeah,
5 and 0.
and then Brad Wiley, he's well, after this fight, he's now 3-3. But one of those fights, he actually stepped up on 24 hours' notice to fight Pugliese, which, I mean, there's not too many people in the country which would do that. But I mean, Brad, he
And
came out.
that's out of his weight class.
It is.
Yeah. Both
He's a
losses
natural
are out of his
flyweight,
weight class.
and he stepped up. And I mean, Brad's one of these people that he's benefited massively by Cardio Flex joining forces with ISA Health, who is a predominant BJJ gym. We've seen it with Shane Mitchell, where the former DFC middleweight champion's actually gone between, or split his camps between both gyms, and it's paying dividends for their fighters because it benefits everyone. Like we said before about cross promotion, this is kind of an infancy stage of cross promotion where, I mean, other fighters are going to other gyms and just really honing their skills about iron sharpening iron. Where at Trinity MMA, where I train out of, there's an open door policy. So we've had Pugliese, we've had Muay Thai fighters, we've had Antonio Caruso recently started coming there, just joining camps, and it's something where people win by going to other gyms having skill sets. And with this fight, you've seen a 22-year-old hungry Brad Wally who's really come out, and he was able to take Shantu down and really control the fight and won a unanimous decision against the experienced veteran. And it's something that this fight showed that both guys are ready to take it to the next level. But Brad Wally, just something special happened with him. He just all of a sudden clicked, and everything been put together and just went into overdrive in this fight. What did you think about the overall performance of both these guys?
Well, basically, Shantu didn't get to implement his game at all. That's how good Brad did. I mean, I think they sort of come out in the first round, and Brad got clipped, and I think from that's when the click went off in his head, and then his game plan went into Brad Wally 101, and he
Grab the
basically
legs and power double.
yeah, and hold you down and bash you up, And look, the one thing that I really took away from this fight is that Brad Wally, when he goes to professional, is going to be a scary, scary flyweight. And the reason being is obviously in the amateur ranks, you can't throw elbows. And if you look at the way that he fights and his style of fighting, elbows are going to be like right in his wheelhouse.
He just constantly changing, switching stances, changing levels. And I mean, once he's had the proverbial leash taken off of, and he can go in there and throw those elbows, throw those knees, throw those spinning things. I mean, watch out. This guy's dangerous, and he's 22 years old, and that's the scary thing. He's improved that much in the past year, where he's coming off back-to-back victories in his natural in his natural division, and he's coming off piling these victories, not only just in a dominant fashion, but he's just imposing his will. He's going out there. His game plan is to stick to him and take him down, and he's just doing it to an absolute T.
Yeah, 100%, mate. But that was the amateur card. But and then there was sort of like a 10-minute break. And actually, the next two fights were the two fights that I got to call with you.
That the crowd went nuts when they saw you go to the commentator booth. They thought they were in for something special when Wombat steps up to the DFC podium.
You are so full of shit. It is unbelievable. but mate, it was
fun. They were fun fights to commentate, and I mean, Tahiwi Sellers McGee and Rainer Famera. I mean, Tahiwi is another very tough dude out of ATT, and Rainer's a guy from Cardioflex, and Rainer came in with absolutely no game plan whatsoever. Tahiwi was the kind of guy that came in and went, right, well, I'm obviously going to come in here and impose my will, but Rainer was 0-3, and he came out swinging for the fences.
Well, the thing for me, and I say this quite a lot, is, well, I say it, however many fights, are on per night. And what I say is that losses in MMA don't really mean too much. No. And this fight really proved it because, a combined record, I believe, of 1-5. I think Tahiwi was 1-2. And like you said, Rainer was 0-3 going into it. it really did prove to me that losses do mean jack shit because these two guys didn't look out of place at all, did they? I mean, round one was absolute fire, and from there, the fight kind of just built and it built, and eventually, Rayner really started finding his range with that left hook. He really was landing that left hook quite a bit on the
Yeah.
feet, but eventually, Tahiwi in his game, just sort of always coming forward and eventually getting it down to the ground and he landed a nasty elbow, which in between rounds kind of stopped the fight. Which, oh, sorry, it wasn't in between rounds. It was only with what
A few seconds
a
to
few
go. But
seconds to go
I
in the
mean,
last round.
this
Yeah.
this fight really turned my head because on paper, a lot of people have gone, "Oh yeah, this isn't probably going to be anything special." Oh my God, these guys tore it up. The crowd was on their feet. This was an absolute slugfest, and it had two guys coming out going, "You know what? We're going to open up the main card, but we're going to not only open up, we're going to go backstage and say to everyone, hey, follow that." And this is something where I would love to see this fight again because this could have gone either way, and both guys absolutely brought it.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I'm not sure, and I really wouldn't mind finding out, but Tahili might have been down on the cards.
Yeah, I think so too.
I got a funny feeling that Rayner would have walked away with a decision in this one, and so it'd be really interesting to find that out. But that's the game, isn't it? It's brutal, and as we seen just the other day at UFC with Yair Rodriguez with that unbelievable elbow with 1 second to go. I mean,
I'm going to duck a punch, throw a back elbow, and hope it lands. But
on perfect timing, just in the perfect place with a second left on the clock. Yeah, it's
and you think if that fight it was 2 seconds shorter, Zombie would have won that by majority decision. The
100%.
afterwards show that he was the clear winner of that, but it just just shows that anything can happen. But I mean, I would honestly love to see that fight again because that fight was one of the first time of the night where the crowd was like, "Wow, these guys are throwing." I mean, not taken away from any of the amateur bouts, but I mean, these guys just went out there and thought, you know what? We're going for the fences here.
Well, and it kind of shows the difference between the amateurs and the professionals. That fight really did. A lot of the times, you in the amateur fights, you might see both guys later on going down into professional, but not quite ready yet, or you might see one guy that's ready to go professional, but once both guys are professional, they really kind of did. So, you can see the separation between them. So, great fight, really good fight to get the pro card going, and then obviously our second fight, mate, we had the Safa, we had the South African Justin Van Heerden, and he took on one of the nicest guys in MMA, and Alan Happy Hartley, who travels, man. It doesn't matter where his fights are. He's got to travel hours to get there.
Oh, he does. He lives in rural South Australia, and he just started up his own gym called Complete Control Martial Arts. And this is a rural. It's like a mining town. And a lot of his students travel, an hour or two each way just to train with him. But the interesting thing about Happy Hartley is that every single DFC, I think he's fought in all but one now, but every single DFC, he has multiple guys from his gym on the card. So Alan goes from wrapping fists to talking game plans to cornering, then quickly running backstage and getting ready for his fight. And this is the first time he's ever fought where he hasn't had to worry about anyone else. But the scary thing is this is the first time he's actually fought with a head coach from Nick Hughes from Trinity MMA. And he's actually come in and had a full camp where the whole focus has been on him. And then fighting a very tough and outspoken Justin Van Heerden, who unfortunately he missed weight, but I mean, obviously Happy Hartley was like, you know what, I'm going to take it on regardless. But this was a very tough back and forward, which, I mean, it could have gone either way. And in pure Alan Hartley fashion, every time he got clocked in the head, he just smiled. But, I mean, Justin just kept taking the fight to him. And, I mean, Justin's still he's a young dude. He's had 9 amateur fights, the South African, but God, he looked impressive in this fight.
Look, for me, they actually both really looked impressive. Especially Alan's stand up. I mean, I think he's really come leaps and bounds with his stand up. Um, there were moments in the fight where he really was landing some shots on Just. So, but like you said, Justin just kind of he really did just do his thing, and going into the fight, I could have basically laid out his game plan for you, and that's what his game plan's going to be pretty much in all of his fights. And the problem is you got to stop it, and it's really not that easy.
I mean, the
Training
way
up there south side, especially with Pasha Stoya, and that guy's going to have you on the mats working hard. So and it
I mean,
really,
the way Van Herden fights is just reminiscent of a Khabib Nurmagomedov, where he just once he gets a hold of you, I mean, he ain't letting go. He's going to stick to you. He's going to throw strikes. He's going to smother you. He's going to wear you down and grind you. And he did that, and he managed to walk away with the victory. But I mean, the fight that really took me by surprise was the next one was Nick Edwards and Dan Soltiak. So Nick Edwards stepped in on a week's notice. The geezer who, I mean, every time he fights, the crowd just go wild. Like, this guy is a big, strong middleweight, and he's the kind of guy that he just bull rushes opponents and he comes out swinging. And we've seen that with, his victories over Josh Frank, where he just comes out and he's like a bull out the gate. But Dan Soltiak, when we did the hype show, Dan's 45 years old. It was his first ever professional fight. The original opponent of his pulled out with a broken foot. And as soon as I heard that Geezer stepped in, I thought, oh, I'm worried for Dan because he's going to go against a really tough dude. And I mean, Nick in the first round came out and he, like we thought, he bull rushed. He went for a bit of a premature armbar, but he absolutely rocked Dan. But then Dan came out in the second round, and I don't know what got into him, but all of a sudden, the former European karate champion started landing, axe kicks, spinning kicks, combinations. There was an illegal knee that happened when Nick was down, which, I mean, Geese ended up getting up with and copping it. But all of a sudden, the inner karate kid and Dan Solsiak came out, and he just started unloading on these really, unconventional strikes from all these crazy angles, and he was landing, and he looked like a seasoned vet.
yeah, it was actually really impressive to watch because usually when I go to a fight show, I'm older than all of the competitors, but this guy's got me by a good 7 odd years. So for me, Geezer stepping up on a week's notice, up a weight class. I mean, I believe he weighed in under the limit, I believe.
Yeah, he weighed in 87.8, and he didn't have to cut at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he for a fighter to do that as a professional, I mean, that's a dude who's going to fight anyone, anywhere, anytime. And a lot of them say it, and you hear a lot of people in and around the fight scene say exactly what I'm going to say now, is that a lot of them say that they'll fight anyone, anytime, anywhere, but that's not really the case.
No, it's
It's
pick and choose.
it's far from the case. So for me, Geezer, mate, you're an absolute bloody warrior. And like you said, had his moments. In fact, in that first round, I thought he actually could have put Dan away.
Yeah, the hype show, and Craig messaged Mike and I and said, Dan's original opponent pulled out. And I just sent a text message back saying, Geezer, Nick. And then Craig ended up calling Nick and didn't tell him who was fighting, didn't tell him what weight class. Just said, do you want to fight Saturday night? He's like, yep.
Love it. I love that shit. It's my favorite stuff. There's I say my favorite local fighter is Junior Moe, and that's because he does that sort of stuff all the time as well. So and that's purely really the only reason.
Well,
It does help that he knocks people out, but that's what I love, man, and that's really what the local scene's about. And I guess some people are not afraid to sort of test themselves. You know what I mean?
Geezer is in a lot of the promotional material for DFC because he's the company guy, but he's the guy that people love to watch him fight. And he's the kind of guy that represents DFC so well because he's like, yeah, I'll fight. I don't care who. I'll put on a show. I'm always training. I'll be there. And that's the kind of thing that you want. You want reliable athletes that actually go, this is what I want to do. You don't want people to try to pick and choose to try and pad their records. But the thing with DFC, they pride themselves with it, is that they always provide fair matchups. So there's never going to be, someone coming off with a ridiculously high record against a ridiculously low record. There've always people that are evenly matched. And I mean, that was just like the Legacy Cup, the middleweight between Daniel Almeida and Dan Curry, where, I mean, Daniel Almeida is probably the most experienced, or one of the most experienced BJJ black belts in Australia. He's had a black belt for 10 years, been doing BJJ for 25 years. And Dan, the Tractor Curry, has got a brown belt. And in doing the hype show, we just thought, well, is this going to cancel each other out, where you've got two very smart BJJ practitioners that a lot of the time that would neutralize and turn each other into a stand-up battle? And I mean, this is one finish that I was sitting there going, oh, I wonder what Wombat's saying about this.
Well, I'll tell you what Wombat was doing. He made his way right down to the front. You know where that pylon is on the right,
Yeah.
just of the cage. So that's where I was watching it. So I had a brilliant view of the fight, and look, I'll tell you what. If there was an oh my god moment of the night, pretty much this was it. It was absolutely shocking / amazing at the same time.
It was the personification of timing and precision.
Oh, look, it really was. And I spoke to Dan after the fight, Daniel Almeida, and he was saying that they actually practiced that quite a bit, because he went southpaw, changed his angle, and waited exactly, apparently, how they drill it all the time. And that's why straight after he's landed that head kick, he was, you could see him looking in his corner for someone specifically, and it was obviously to his striking coach, where he was basically pointing at him, and he said, the first thing he basically said was, "That one's for you." And for who his striking coach, that must have been pretty cool. But yeah, man, I mean, like you said, I thought Dan would still, sort of press him up against the cage, maybe take him down and try and build him up a bit from top. But
yeah,
but it really sort of didn't play out that way. Dan was shaping a lot of the time to throw an uppercut, but he didn't really throw that many.
He was kind of pulling it. He was trying to just throw some punches out just to gauge the difference, and then take a step back or step in to see where he was. But the exciting thing about this fight was, this was, in my view, one of the potential fights to see who's the number one contender for Rick Olchin's title. And you wanted a statement on a middleweight fight, and Daniel Almeida, he finished that with an exclamation point.
Hey man, that's not a bad shout, because you know what I love from promotions is when there's sort of continuity from card to card, where you can see the progression of the people who have fought on the show beforehand making their way kind of up through the invisible ranks and fighting for those titles, and kind of DFC. I mean, we're talking about DFC 7, so we're in the infancy of that sort of stuff playing out. But when that stuff plays out, I love that. I love that shit, And so for me, mate, that's not a bad shout. I mean, for Daniel,
you watch with this fight, that was Almeida and Curry. They were their BJJ skills neutralize each other. Where someone like Rick Olchin, who is also a black belt in BJJ, you never know, it could turn up to be just a stand-up war between those two. And Daniel Almeida used to be a light heavyweight, so he's a big dude. He's probably as strong as Olchin, or even as built as Olchin. But I mean, that would be a very exciting fight that I would be absolutely salivating over watching. Just two absolute beast middleweights with amazing BJJ coming off it. I mean, it has fireworks written all over it.
I believe I seen Rick Olchin squatting 260 kilograms the other day on Instagram.
He does strongman competitions on the side as well. So
the guy's a freak, and he's from my area. I love the guy. So, mate, if you want to see that fight up, hey, Ike, man, there's a fight for you, baby. Hey, that doesn't sound too bad for a DFC 8 main event, eh?
And what about the main event for the first ever DFC Australian Featherweight Championship?
It was, look, before we even talk about it, like you said, what what Craig's been doing with the matchups is he's trying to really, find the best, fight the best because, and
Yeah,
it's very hard to do for reasons what we said before. Sometimes guys just don't take the fights. Sometimes guys are fighting in other promotions and the dates just don't line up. There's a lot of factors where it's actually really, really hard to get a couple of top 10 guys fight each other. And this was the number 4 versus the number 6 guy, according to Tapology in Australia, which we won't get into. But anyway, and to be honest, they could even be ranked higher than that
yeah.
on other people's rankings. So, just a cracking main event for the inaugural title. And Josh obviously is the current Hex featherweight champion. So he was coming across to Adelaide, owning that belt against Rodolfo Marquez, who, this is a guy whose record and experience speaks for itself.
I
You
mean, he's probably
know,
the most experienced featherweight in Australia with 25-10.
oh, and one of the best records. I mean, that's no joke of a record because,
Well, the
like I
fact
was
is,
saying, like losses in MMA don't really mean anything, and to have sort of a winning record of 25-10, you're no joke.
and that's not a pattern record as well. I mean, he's fought the best, the
Oh, he's
best. I mean,
fought everyone.
he's fought Alexander Volkanovski, who's about to fight Chad Mendes in the UFC. Like he's gone through a lot of people, but I mean, the thing that's so impressive about this is Josh Kulabau he's 24 years old, and I mean, not taking away anything from what he did in the cage. Afterwards, he's he personifies what you want as an ambassador for the sport. Like he's got his head switched on. He's trained with the ATT, so he's got great mentors in the Mokhtarian brothers. But he's the kind of guy that just the way he acts and conducts himself, you go, I want this guy to represent my company and represent my sport. That's not taking anything away from Rodolfo. But when the way he won, where Sir Mokhtarian was screaming out for the head kick and he landed, but the way he conducted himself after, it just he was such an impressive young man and such a pleasure to talk to. And the fact that he's tough as nails, like he's the kind of guy that you would expect to see at high school, being or at university, being the quiet guy. But holy shit, can this kid fight? And he's 24. And the scary thing is, he's going to get better. He's not even in his prime yet.
Oh, 100%. And he is, don't worry, a certified nerd. We found that out the other day. But look, I've got a little there's a little special place, in my commentary heart with Josh because I've actually shared the mic with him before. So we've commentated together. And I'm not sure if you actually know the kid or not, but you've absolutely nailed it on the head because he really is just a nice guy. It's actually super, super hard to believe that this guy is possible, really probably Australia's best featherweight. Definitely, arguably. I can't really think. I mean, Jackson Small's obviously the XFC champion. That'd be a cracking fight. But
Yeah.
apart from that, he really is stuck his neck out as Australia's best featherweight. And the guy is just such a nice kid. Not only that, his whole family is. So, he's obviously got just cracking support behind him. His girlfriend was there as well, Sarah. So shout out to Sarah. And look, I was actually in their dressing room, and it was actually a sight to see Josh flick that switch and go from just lovable guy to absolute murderer. So,
Yeah, like I said it
um,
about Pugliese in the hype show as well, but like you're probably in the same boat where you around fighters all the time, and in some times that there's someone that comes across that really turns your head, and you go, oh my god, this guy's got something special. Pugliese has it, but Josh McCullough, like the second I saw him, all facets of his game, like his fight IQ when he listened to Suman land that head kick, the way he was composed, and even at the point where during the fight when Rodolfo had him, smothered against the cage, Kulabau was looking at those multiple screens that you spoke about earlier around the cage, just watching, where his positioning was, and utilized not only the cage to his advantage, but the media around the screens. And he was so composed, and he looked like he felt at home. Like, he looked like Demetrius Johnson going to a title fight, where he just looked like he's been there hundreds of times before. He looked like he belonged. And a lot of times you see when fighters step up, like when certain UFC fighters, I forget his last name, Kenny, he fought multiple title fights and never got over the line. Kenny Florian, whenever he fought, he just he didn't look as comfortable as what he did in other fights when he fought for titles. But Kulabau, when he got in that cage, he looked like a seasoned veteran. He looked like he owned that cage, and he walked into that cage like he was walking there in a custom Versace suit. Like, he looked the part, he spoke the part, and he fought the part.
And to be honest, that's his strongest test to date by some
Oh,
way, in
by
my
far.
opinion, and really passed it with flying colors. And to be honest, like, it doesn't really that sort of a fight does not suit his game plan at all. So
No,
it was an amazing test for him. Rodolfo really went out there with a game plan and stuck to it. Before the finish, it was right at the end of the fourth round. I was sort of working out in my head what the score might be, sort of going into that fourth round, and it might have been 2-2. It might have even been 3-1 for Rodolfo,
yeah.
depending on sort of judges and their criteria and how they score fights, just purely based on cage pressure. You
Well, that's the
know,
thing with Rodolfo. Most of his fights, he's won by decision. That's because he just grinds down people. He's got some scary good BJJ, and he just grinds down people. But Kulabau was able to pick his breaks, and the second that head kick was open, I think you even said that you picked it before, and as soon as that small opportunity, he threw it, he connected, and then he had the killer instinct to finish off. And all of a sudden, we've got our first ever DFC Australian featherweight champion.
well, you're giving me some raps, but I've actually got backup because I was standing next to Antonio the Spartan Caruso, and I did actually, I believe I must have called it out round about the same time as Suman, because it was really like, from my angle, when they sort of separated and Josh fixed his shorts and that teep, he threw that teep a couple of times, and you could see him ducking his head all the time, sort of straight, ready for that head kick. Yeah, it was just it was actually a very wow moment for me, because, it's kind of when lightning strikes, when you see the opening, you call it, you actually say it out loud and someone else hears it, and then it happens and you're like, yep, fucking nailed that one.
I mean, it was an amazing show. Like, we were speaking off air before about potential fights to make, and I think Almeida and Olchin. But like you said, you were standing next to Antonio the Spartan Caruso. Imagine the fireworks that would go off if Caruso and Caruso is obviously a welterweight, and Shane Mitchell, the former DFC middleweight champion, that could potentially be an absolute barn burner, and probably two of the best welterweights in the country right there. I mean, that's something that just screams out main event with those two guys.
You're gonna need a bigger stadium.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think just those two boys alone would probably sell that joint out. So that's a cracking fight. Like, absolutely, sign me up for that one.
But I'm
But
looking forward to it, the next TFC. So it's either going to be in February or March at this stage. There might be something special that it's in brewing for that, but
oh, I've been
I
I've
mean,
been notified. I've been notified. We'll keep that. We're not allowed to say that on air,
we'll
but
keep it under wraps. But it's going to be something where it's DFC is not only going to take a step, it's going to take a leap up into prominence. And it's the kind of thing where I'm very humbled and excited to be a part of this. I mean, I love MMA. I've been watching it for years. I've been training with Turner for years, and a few other guys there. And I kept rocking up to work with broken bones and black eyes, which I probably can't keep doing that anymore. But it's definitely something where DFC is bringing the sport in the right direction. Not only is it, like I said, dealing with production issues, but they're treating all fighters, whether they be professional or amateur, like they're the main event. So amateurs are coming across, making their debuts, and like I said at the start, being flown into state, being put up in hotels, getting great exposure. And that's my favorite thing about DFC is just watching these deserving athletes get the spotlight, which they may not necessarily get if they fought on other shows. And that's the one thing that it's really just bringing the sport into a different light. And if you've got a match, or if you've got a card in a world class venue, it's going to turn heads.
Well, listen, if what they've got brewing down there at Diamondback comes into fruition, it's going to be a first, and it's going to be massive,
And it's going to
and
be something that turns a lot of heads.
it'll basically shake the scene right up, and it's very exciting. And what's even more exciting is, when stuff like this and the big things get in the pipeline, even if it doesn't come off, just people thinking about it and pushing the sport in that sort of direction is really cool to see. And look, I tell you what, we better wrap this stuff up. But before we go, I was just down in Adelaide, but baby, I'm coming back in a couple of weeks' time because, man,
I
the
don't think Adelaide's ready
UFC's
for you again, Wombat.
Oh, trust me, mate. Trust me. I've Hindley Street's more than ready. It's more than capable of coping for me. Trust me. But mate, UFC's down there. Are you excited for that one?
Oh, mate, I can't wait. And the great thing that I can see about this card is it's stacked with Australians. And I mean, it was definitely something there. We were all hoping in South Australia where someone like Shane Mitchell would be on this card. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out that way. But I mean, Shane's going to be a guy that's going to be in the UFC in no time whatsoever. But I mean, most of this card is stacked with Australians and legends. And I mean, it's not too often you see a card of this caliber in a home or in Australia, where I mean, usually you see these fight nights are just reserved for maybe one massive name, and then we'll just put a few local guys in. But the fact with this, we have JDS and Tuivasa, we have Tyson Pedro and Shogun, we have Mark Hunt, we have Jim Croup, we have Yushin Nakami, we have the Mokhtarian brothers, who, I mean, they're a massive part of DFC. But again, going back, if you think the Mount Rushmore of Australian MMA, these guys, they're not quite prominent on the UFC radar, but they're the two guys that, I mean, I would challenge anyone in Australia to show that there's been two guys that have done more for the sport in Australia than these two guys. They have trained many killers, many amazing athletes. But I mean, it just shows that DFC is growing, UFC is growing, the sport's growing in Australia. It's the second time they've come into Adelaide. I mean, it's going to be an absolute stacked show, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Mark Hunt again, and obviously Mauricio Rua. And even JDS, like, they're in the twilight of their careers. It's just going to be interesting to see that if I mean, we don't want them to fall on their sword. We want to see them keep going, but unfortunately, some things have to come to an end. But what do you think? Do you think that this is going to be the last of the three of them, or do you think that they're going to keep kicking on? I mean, they're not going to be like TRTV Tour and come out and head kick people in the late part of their career, but they're definitely going to come out, put on a show, and I mean, we're hoping it's not their last fights, but we don't want them to to go out on a low.
Well, I mean, it's Mark Hunt's last fight on his UFC contract,
Yeah.
so it is more than possible that it will be Mark Hunt's last UFC fight. I mean, it's probably more than likely. However, I still believe if it is his last fight for the UFC, I still think there's some fights out and some promotions that would just snap him up, like Risen, or one of those big Japanese kind of shows or something along the lines of that. I can't imagine that. You know what? He might even shake things up and maybe go do Bellator kickboxing. Who knows?
Oh, mate,
he can do whatever he wants.
Put him on Bellator against like a tree stump or something. Just watch him hack it down.
Oh, him versus Fatal. There you go. There's a fight for you.
Book it.
But let's be honest. I mean, you can't not get up for a Mark Hunt fight. And the crazy thing is, he's third on the card. Like
Yeah.
he's not even, you know, headlining the card because
Well, he headlined it last time with Stipe, and I mean the thing with Mark is that I've never watched Mark in a boring fight. Like I don't think he has it in him to put on a boring fight. He just wants to stand there and throw. Like, he's got such a great level of gravity where he's hard to take down. But once he neutralizes wrestling and then just stands in front of people and just goes, you know what, I'm throwing. Like, do what you want, but I am throwing.
well, the best thing is I think he's got a pretty good dance partner in Justin Willis. So Justin, I mean, does have a lot of power on his feet. He does kind of wrestle a little bit, but the thing is Justin's more kind of Mark's size, and he's
Yeah.
more sort of Mark's height. So I got a funny feeling Mark will be pretty good keeping it on his feet, and you know, I've got to be pretty impartial here because I'll be covering it for Flow Combat. So I'm not going to give my prediction, but I've got a funny feeling that Mark's going to put on a performance there. Tyson against Shogun, that's just an incredible opportunity for Tyson Pedro to fight a legend like that. And obviously he's trying to get a win back for his teammate, as is Tai Tuivasa in JDS, because he obviously got that win up in Brisbane over Mark Hunt.
Yeah.
So, but like, you know, I'm really, really excited for Jimmy Crute. I've been interviewing that guy for, you know, a couple of years, and he's actually, well, actually, I've got to bring Suman into that list now as well because he's now on the card. But these guys are, you know, for me is the first time where, you know, I've interviewed them on the local scene, and now I'm going to be interviewing them in the UFC. And
I mean, they're also
that's
great ambassadors for the sport. I mean, there's probably a match or two that they might be able to fill in the card, and I'd like to see someone like Dan Kelly get a send-off fight, or
not a chance. You know why? Melbourne's his gig. I reckon because they announced the UFC in Melbourne in February,
yeah,
and that being his hometown, you know, I'd love to see him on both. But, you know, honestly, I just kind of think that would be his go. And if he would to pick, I'd believe he'd probably pick Melbourne as well. But which is fair enough. But yeah, there is a couple of spots left. There's only 10 fights. Oh, don't forget Jakey Matthews is on this card as well, which I've seen that guy fight, well, for his last however many fights. And he's always a great fight. He's always like a cracking fight to watch.
It's just good to see that they're actually stacking the card, like I said before, where sometimes the fight nights don't actually have pay-per-view quality bouts. But I think if you look at this card compared to some of the earlier pay-per-view cards in this year, it stacks up. Like, it's definitely, you've got three of the biggest names in UFC over the past few years. You've got two Pride vets. You've got up and coming young hungry Australians, and you've got Yushin Nakami. Like, what else could you actually ask for?
Oh man, as an Aussie, like this is a pay-per-view card for me. Like this, as an Australian UFC fan, this doesn't really get too much better, to be honest. So, mate, super looking keen to getting back down there. I'll be there all week covering it for Flow Combat, so everyone can keep their eyes out for that. My man, mate, I got to let you go. It's been an amazing time catching up with you, and thank you again for letting me step in, and thanks again to Mike for dropping the mic for me and letting me step in for a few fights. I had a ball. I don't know. What was it like dancing with me, baby? Was it good dancing with me? Or what?
It was great, mate. That's the thing about those heavyweights, mate. They get hungry every 2 hours, so they have to go up and have their food. But no, it was amazing, sharing the dance with you, mate, and hope to look forward to doing it again with you in the future. And thank you so much for having me on the esteemed Ramen Chokehold. I'm very honoured to be on this, and thank you so much for not only you having me, also the people listening at home, and hopefully see you at DFC. If you're a fighter and you want to get on the card, make sure you go onto diamondbackfc.com.au, follow on Facebook, and I'd love to call as many fights as possible, and looking forward to this sport absolutely rocketing in Australia.
Andy Carpenter is one of the best men going around in MMA, ladies and gentlemen. If you're down there at a DFC, make sure you go up and you shake his hand. He's a tall, young, handsome, but recently married, sorry, ladies, fella. And, mate, I'll definitely catch up with you soon. And let's do this again soon.
Sounds good, mate. I look forward to it.
I'm just stopping it, man.